Climbing Gold is brought to you by The North Face. Never stop exploring. Koros, performance sports technology. Element, restoring health through hydration. Henson Shaving, buy once, use for life. And Altitude Climbing, level up your climbing.
Alex, what is a bong?
A bong. A bong is a big piton, so named for the sound that it makes when you bong it into the crack. But I feel like it's maybe a little bit dated now.
Yeah. Skylar, who is our producer here on the show, was editing today's episode, and he's like, turns to me and is like, what is a bong? And I was like, do we need to have like a conversation about drugs right now? Or I was like, that's amazing.
I think that for a modern climber who started climbing in the last few years, it's really hard to appreciate how different climbing was in the 1960s. You don't have a harness, you don't have a belay device, you're literally just wrapping the rope around your waist and holding onto it to try to catch people. And then there's no climbing gear, really. And so you're using pitons, like basically just big chunks of metal, and just hammering them into cracks. And so you have a sling around your shoulder with a bunch of chunks of metal hanging off it, and then you have a hammer hanging off your side. And you're wearing basically work boots, and you have a rope tied around your waist. And so it's all just way more extreme and sort of physical than what we think of as rock climbing now. I mean, rock climbing now ideally is sort of balletic, or, you know, like this beautiful artistic dance up the wall. But 1960s climbing is not beautiful and artistic. It's just like groveling up wide cracks and hammering away. It's all much more blue collar. It's like hard manual labor.
Today's guest has essentially been climbing the entire duration of modern climbing. She was part of the in-between generation that connected Royal Robbins, Fred Beckey, Yvon Chouinard to the Stone Masters. Alex, who is Jamie Logan?
Jamie Logan is maybe most well known for her ascent of the Emperor Face on Mount Robson in 1979. But she was also sort of a pioneer of free climbing and also helped design several modern climbing gyms. Now, well into her 70s, she's still climbing 513, or basically climbing 513. I'll give it to her because, you know, falling at the anchor of your project still is pretty darn close. But I think Jamie, probably more than almost anybody else in climbing, has been through every phase of climbing development, from hammering pitons with no harness to full-on sport climbing at the crag with permadraws in the modern era. And Jamie's been there for all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In 2018, Jamie made a choice that was more harrowing and intimidating than any of her experiences in the mountains as she transitioned to living life as a woman. The world she built, her family, the home she'd found in climbing, all of it seemed potentially in jeopardy. But Jamie took a chance to live as the truest form of herself.
I'm Alex Honnold.
I'm Fitzko Hall.
This is Climbing Gold.
I'm Jamie Logan, and I was an architect. I'm retired now. I designed a lot of climbing gyms, and I've been a rock climber for 66 years, which is a pretty long time.
You know, we've interviewed a lot of stone masters and various old climbers. I don't know if anybody's been climbing more than 66 years.
Well, I'm kind of the oldest person still going, I think, basically. When I was 11 years old, I loved climbing up trees and buildings and rocks and everything. And then these 10th Mountain Division guys in my hometown of Midland, Texas, were going to take me rock climbing. And they took me down to, we found some cliffs down in the Davis Mountains, and they tried to lead and they couldn't remember how to do it. And I said, well, can I? And so they gave me, so I tied a World War II climbing rope around my waist, and I took a sling with a bunch of World War II soft iron pitons and a hammer and some oval steel carabiners. And I climbed up some corner, pounding pins in. And when I got to the top, I said, what do I do now? And they said, pound in a piton and clip a carabiner into it, and we'll lower you down. So I figure I can count that right. I actually led a pitch.
I'm amazed you survived.
We didn't fall a lot in those days.
But you were 11 years old?
I was 11 years old, yeah.
When you learned how to hammer pins?
Well, I didn't learn. I just pounded them one in, or two or five.
That's crazy, though. 'Cause, I mean, I've been climbing for years before I hammered my first pin. Like, literally 15 years, probably, I've been climbing before I nailed a piton. But this is just totally different eras. So back that up a little bit? Like how did you get into climbing in the middle of Texas? Who let an 11-year-old just wander out with some army guys to learn how to rock climb?
Well, they were old. They were guys from the Second World War who now are oil guys.
So they were like recreational rock climbing. They were going out like for pleasure.
They hadn't rock climbed since being in the 10th Mountain Division in 1944.
Since storming the Alps or something, or like.
Yeah, exactly. And they still had the rope and the stuff from storming the Alps. And they had this idea that they still could be climbers, which didn't really work out since I was the only one who actually climbed anything that day. I just loved climbing. I'd read the book about climbing Mount Everest, and I had gotten a catalog from Franconia, New Hampshire, of climbing equipment that you could buy.
What year was this?
1958. I just wanted to be a climber. I would take a clothesline rope and wrap it around a tree and throw it down a cliff and then have my little brother hold the end of it. I made a belt out of leather from the Tandy Leather Company, and I had clips on it, and I tied the rope into the clips on the side of the belt. And the only thing about this is I only weighed like 60 pounds, so it all sort of worked, kind of. Mostly I never fell. That's really what it comes down to.
But so how did you work your way from that kind of scrappy introduction in climbing to all the climbing achievements that you had over your long life?
I was a real screw up in school and total F's and D's and bad grades. And a school counselor, talked my parents into sending me away to school. And so I was able to go to Fountain Valley School in Colorado Springs. This would be my junior year in high school. I would have been 16, I think. And then they said that I could start a climbing team, climbing group, club. And so I found a faculty sponsor, and we hired this guy, Gary Ziegler, and he was a pretty good rock climber, actually. And he took us out once a week to go rock climbing. And I'm the only person he ever let lead. He let me lead Cracked Parallel, I remember. And last year I was down in Colorado Springs and I climbed Cracked Parallel, and it's like bolted. And I led it when I was 16 with pitons and no bolts, like 4 pieces of gear or something, you know. But anyway, so I loved climbing and I was pretty good at it. And so by the end of Mountain Valley, I knew the mechanics of rock climbing. I knew how to hip belay. I knew how to tie the bowline on a coil, pound pins in, take them out, all that stuff.
It's so interesting that when you say that you learned all the mechanics of rock climbing, all the things you just named are no longer relevant to the climbing experience at all. You know, like I bet most people listening to this have literally never even thought, like don't know what a bowline on a coil is, don't know what a hip belay is, have never hammered a piton. You know, it's interesting that all the things that to you marked your introduction to rock climbing are now no longer relevant to the sport.
The hip belay is still totally fast and valid for moving quickly on alpine terrain. You step behind a rock, you put somebody on, you bring them up 15 feet, and off you go again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do too, but nowadays I just use a micro or something, you know, some kind of pulley device where you just clip it on and you just throw slack through, you know, it's just faster and safer. But yeah, I mean, anyway, sorry, so go on. So you went to CU for college.
And I flunked out because I was climbing every day, basically. Climbed with my friends that first year. And every time we wanted to go up a grade, I had to lead it. And there wasn't a guidebook. It was just, I went to El Dorado and I walked along and I found a bolt at my first climb I ever did in El Dorado. I saw a bolt up on the wall. So I had my friend belay me and I climbed up to the bolt and kept going. And that climb is now 11B, I think, or something.
Dude.
But I didn't know. I'm just like, whatever. This is a place other people have climbed. I'm going up.
That is not my approach to rock climbing. If you just walk into the area, you see one random bolt out of face, you'd be like, oh, God.
There was a couple of old soft iron fixed pins, too.
But that is an interesting reminder of an earlier era in climbing when there's way less information, there's less knowledge, there are fewer people doing it, and so it is just all way more adventurous.
Yeah, and I mean, we would go up to Estes Park and climb places in Lumpy Ridge, and you would just see a corner and you'd climb up it. Somewhere on the second pitch, there'd be an old Harvey T. Carter piton pounded in. It'd be like, oh, somebody else has been here before. That's cool. And so it was very exploratory all the time, kind of. And then I needed a climbing partner in the summer 1966. And I went into the hiking club office at CU, which was the epicenter of climbing then. And I said, I need a climbing partner. And the guy said, well, do you want to guide or do you want to take classes or what do you want? And I said, no, I need people to climb. I know how to climb. And he said, how hard can you climb? And I said, well, I can lead 5'8" and follow 5'9". And he said, kid, if you were that good, I'd know who you were. That's what he said. And not too long after that, I met Larry Dalkey, and he was guiding on the third flat iron. I was just soloing up and down the third flat iron. And I said, I need some people to climb with. And he said, well, Wayne Goss wants people to climb with. You should call him. And so I found out how to find Wayne. And Wayne became my lifeline climbing partner. And so I said, oh, I want to do a climb. And he said, okay, well, let's go do the naked edge, which had only been done 4 times. I'm like, okay. And so off we went, and we aided our way up the naked edge. And at the very top, I ran out of gear, pitons, and I set up a belay in this crack, and I had one 2-inch bong and then a knife blade behind a 1/2-inch thick flake, and that's all I had in, because that's all the gear I had left. And so he climbed up to me, and he looked up, and he said, is that the anchor? And I said, yeah. He's John Jumars, and he just immediately pounded a pin in right in front of him, tied the rope to it. But we lived through it, and we did the 5th ascent of the naked edge. And then all of a sudden, I had climbing partners. I became kind of part of the deal. Sometime that summer, I drove up to Castle Rock and in my cowboy boots and my Plymouth sedan, and there were these 2 people climbing, and I got all excited, and I ran up and I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're trying to free climb this route. And it was Royal Robbins and Panamint, and they were trying to free climb this 511. And I said, can I try? And so they said, are you a climber? And I said, yeah. So I went down and got my climbing shoes, my Kronhofer climbing shoes out of the car. And, they were leather shoes with Vibram soles. And I put them on, and I tied my bolt on a coil, and they had a top rope on it. And I proceeded to on-site this thing that they were projecting. And they were kind of amazed. And then the next day, I was at the university at the restaurant at the student center, and I was sitting by myself over on the side because I didn't know anybody. And in the middle of the restaurant was this big round table, and that's where the real climbers sat, and which was Leighton Core and Larry Dalkey and those guys. And so Pat Ament saw me over there, and he came and got me, and he brought me over to that big table, and he said, this is Jamie Logan, or Jim Logan then. This is Jim Logan, and he can climb 5'10". And I was like, and then after that, I could sit at the big table because I could climb 5'10".
It's a good reminder that even in the 1960s, there's always some random kid that's going to walk up and onsite your project. You're like, even the professional climbers of their day, Royal Robbins is like, oh, I'm just doing something rad out here. And then some random kid shows up and onsites his project. Like, it's good to know that that's been a universal experience in climbing since the very beginning.
There's always, no matter how good you think you are, there's always some random kid.
Yeah, there's always some random guy showing up in cowboy boots about to send your proj.
Exactly.
Like, oh man, that's crazy. And so, do you remember doing the first free ascent of Crack of Fear?
Actually, it was, I think, the summer of 1967. And I was living in this house with these other climbers. And I had basically flunked out of school, and I didn't know what I was doing. But anyway, I was trying to redeem myself. So I was taking a PE class in rock climbing as a summer elective.
That seems like a gimme.
Yeah. And so the Crack of Fear had been climbed by Leighton Core, and Leighton was a very good free climber and liked to free climb because free climbing was fast, but all he cared about and the ethic of the time was to move quickly. And so it was like, if there was a piton, why wouldn't you hold on to it and stand on it? Because that was faster. And so Leighton had put 2 bolts in the crux of the Crack of Fear and climbed the first ascent. Royal was looking for a next big project, so Royal came out and tried to do it, and he couldn't free climb that section. And so it was kind of known as the next hardest climb in the country to do, I think.
And can you describe the crack? I've actually never climbed it, but I was looking at some pictures and I was like, oh, I can see why it's the Crack of Fear, because it's like so big and intimidating. It looks horrible.
Well, so the biggest gear we had was 4 inches, and it was 6. Essentially, you didn't have any gear in it. There's a place up in the middle of it where the wall you're facing fades away, so there's nothing really to push on, and it gets quite hard. And Leighton had put 2 bolts in there. And so this guy, Chris Fredericks, was one of the better climbers in the valley. And Chris wanted to climb the Crack of Fear, so he flew to Boulder, and he didn't have a partner. And somebody said that I was a good off-width climber. So they said that I would go. And so we went up there, and I led the first pitch, basically, with 2 pieces of gear. 150 feet. That was what there was, right?
Classic off-withing, yeah, of course.
And so I got to the ledge, and then Chris came up, and then he led the next part. And it was really, he's the one who really did it. And he did this amazing thing where he climbed up the off-width. He did clip the 2 bolts, but then he was up high in it, and he got an arm over, and he took a 1-inch angle off his sling and put it in a little crack above and got his hammer out. This is all from a arm bar. And then drove a 1-inch angle in and then clipped it and then did this little 510 traverse left. And we had basically done it. So I followed this pitch, and when I got to the 1-inch angle, there was no question I was not going to try to take it out. I got the carabiner off and thought that was good. So I successfully free climbed it. And I was just this 120-pound, skinny, bloody mess, basically. We were coming down, and I said to Chris, I said, can't wait to get back to the UMC and tell everybody. And he said, well, that's not really why we're supposed to be doing this. He later spent the rest of his life in a Zen monastery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Though it's funny because a route like that, I mean, so that was the late 1960s, it still instills fear in people. It's still hard, It's like, I mean, I know some of my friends who have gone up there within the last few years and had full-on epics. They're like, oh, it's so hard.
Yeah. I think actually both Tommy and Cedar concede that it's probably would be 11C in normal climbing things. But we rated it 510 because that was the highest grade there was.
So did that make it one of the hardest routes in the country at the time?
It was probably the hardest route in the country, I think. Although, all the time back through there was no communication and stuff. So people were doing little bits of things here and there that were really hard, often in mountain boots and stuff like that. So I think it's dubious for anybody to ever say that it was the hardest thing.
That's the interesting thing, I think, about climbing at that era is that it's all hard off-width and hard chimneys. Basically, it's all climbing that you could do in your mountain boots. I think of now because, I've soloed a lot of routes like that and done a lot of things in Yosemite where you're just sort of on adventurous scrambles. And things from the 60s or 70s that are sort of like 5'8", 5'9", you can kind of guarantee that it's going to be a wide, like fearsome gash, where you're like, oh, somebody was climbing this with no protection in their mountain boots. But it's the type of climbing that sort of rewards hard work and serious effort. Like if you just get in there and try really hard and thrash, like super blue collar, kind of like, well, if you've been digging ditches all season, then you are trained up to climb this crack.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that it wasn't really good to put bolts in at that time. We put bolts in where it was totally blank and we had to for direct aid, but the idea of putting a bolt in so you could free climbing was not okay. So in any case, the offwits were a place like Crack of Doom in Yosemite, another one of those Chuck Pratt things. No gear, you just go and stick your arm and legs in there and start going,
Yeah. And then just hope that you never get too tired. Just keep grinding your way upward. We'll be back with more after the break. I've been a North Face athlete for almost 18 years, which has been incredible, and I've always appreciated their commitment to exploration. Summit Series is the name of the pinnacle North Face products that I use on every expedition, and I love that their tagline is athlete tested and expedition proven. I've personally tested these products all over the world, and they've always proven themselves. Future Fleece is the next generation base layer that I wear almost every day of climbing outside, whether on the wall or at the crag. You can shop the full Summit Series collection at thenorthface.com. I first found Coros when I was looking for a GPS watch that could track my biggest outdoor adventures. I needed something with a massive battery life that was also robust enough to handle the climbing. As it turns out, Coros is the only GPS watch brand that has done some serious development for climbers, from multi-pitch GPS tracking to indoor programmed workouts. The watches have a mind-blowing battery life. The Vertex watch series lasts for more than 100 hours in GPS activities, so I only need to charge it once every several weeks. I only need to charge my watch so sporadically that I can never find the charger, because I haven't used it in 6 weeks. If you're interested in bringing new technology into your climbing training and tracking, you should consider their new Vertex 2S. Go to Coros.com and use the code ClimbingGold to secure a free watch carabiner with the purchase of your new Vertex 2S. The link's in the show notes. Talk about that transition over the next 10 years going from sort of hard work climbing to what we think of as modern free climbing.
So the thing that I think is pretty fascinating is when I was starting in high school in 1965, It was really not any different than the way climbing had been done in 1945. You tied the rope around your waist. You had mostly mountain boots. The only climbing shoes in the world were made by Mr. Kronhofer, and you would draw a picture of your foot on a piece of paper and mail it to him in Switzerland, and then he would mail you back a pair of shoes. Anyway, so that was this, and it was pitons, no harness, hip belay. By the time I free climbed the Diamond, 1976, 10 years later, we had harnesses, we had belay devices, we had nuts, but not cams. But essentially, we, the whole community, and I'm especially going to include the Brits in this because they were very involved. There was a lot of movement of information back and forth to England. We had changed climbing from this archaic thing into pretty much the modern deal. It was pretty close to what we do now, essentially. So I think that was pretty cool. It was really fun time to be making things up, essentially. The summer of 1967, I went to El Dorado to find somebody to climb with. And I'm walking down the road and I see this VW bus up there. And I walk up to it and it's Royal and Padamant. And so I said, what are you guys going to do? And they said, we're going to climb the Grand Giraffe. Then Pat says, we're not going to take any piton. And Royal says, I have these new things that I got from Sheffield that are pieces of metal that we put in the crack, and we call them nuts. And some of them were literally machine nuts, literally a nut that would go on a bolt with a sling through it. And he had this rack of Moax and PEX and pieces of steel and stuff. And he said, we're going to go climb it. And he was on this journey to travel across the country and introduce clean climbing. This trip ended up in Yosemite with the Nutcracker. And so we went up on the Grand Giraffe, and Royal's leading actually the off-width, and he got up in the off-width and he stopped and he turned around and he said, how hard is this? And I said, 5.8. And he said, this is the hardest 5.8 I've ever climbed in my life. And we also had no gear in it, right? We had zero protection. You just let it.
He's really putting the clean into clean climbing. He's like super clean. The rope doesn't touch anything.
The rope doesn't touch anything.
There's just no protection. It's super clean climbing.
Exactly. But we were putting in the nuts and starting to get it. And Pat went up on leading and he put in the nut. And he took his hammer, he started pounding it in. And Royal's yelling at him because there are like 12 nuts in the entire country. And we have them on the rack and he's about to pound one of them in. And Boulder knew how much destruction pitons cost. We knew we were wrecking the climbing resource by pounding pitons in and taking them out. So we were pretty excited. So I started making them and other people started making them. And everybody had a rack that was homemade, that was their own rack, you can imagine. And when you go, you'd say, well, you want to bring my rack or yours? And you'd kind of look at theirs and say, about you take yours and I'll take mine. And we would take rocks and put them in our climbing coats because we had these big coats with leather on them for rappelling, for body repels. And then you'd climb up and then you'd put a rock in a place that you like to climb a lot. Instead of having to put a piton in, if you found a rock and you could put it down in and then hammer it in, then you could put a sling around it. So it was like creating a sport route in a way, except by pounding rocks into the cracks. And there's still climbs in Eldo that have rocks that I put in. That every time I go by, I put a sling on it just for nostalgia. So we were making it up.
Now that all feels so old school, it's like, it's so amazing. You're like, that just feels like a completely different world from what modern climbing has kind of become.
Well, I mean, like the Crack of Fear was about free climbing. And also in El Dorado, you had Roger Briggs and Padamant in particular, Larry Dalkey on occasion, really pushing this idea of just free climbing for its own sake. In Yosemite, the driver, in the whole country, the whole driver of this was Frank Sacker in the valley, the Sacker Cracker. And so Frank was taking Dick Erb and these people up and doing first free ascents. And my friend Dick Erb was with Frank, and he fell leading, and he fell 150 feet in the air. He ripped everything out of the pitch, and he fell onto Frank, who the rope, I think, went through one piton, and he stopped. And he told me that as he spun out into space, he just thought, this is the most beautiful place. It's a good place to die. And so anyway, so then he gets back to the ledge, and Frank Sacker's hands are all burned from catching this fall on a hip belay through a carabiner. And so Frank says, you have to relead the pitch because this is the first free ascent, and if you hold on to stuff, it won't count. So you have to relead the pitch, and I can't because my hands are too burned. And so Dick Erb releads the pitch. I think he did hold on to whatever he wanted. He just didn't tell Frank. At this point, it's just like, we got to get out of here. So anyway, so it was a real interesting time. And in El Dorado and on Castle Rock, actually, we were trying to free climb things just for its own sake. So by 67, 68, free climbing for its own sake was totally a thing. And partly we realized it was faster than direct aid. And also it was fun. So it was cool to do the first free ascent of something in El Dorado.
You climbed in the valley a little bit as well, I know.
Yeah, I went to the valley in 1967 for the first time. I don't remember that trip as much as the next spring, the spring of 68. I showed up early when it was still snow on the ground. And there were like 8 of us there when everybody else left after the weekend, right? And Bridwell was the only Californian, the Bircheff brothers sometimes, but mostly Jim. So it was me and Bridwell. There were 2 guys from Seattle, Jim Madsen and Kim Schmitz. Jim Madsen, who's the best rock climber I ever knew in my life. 2 guys from Portland were there a lot. The old school of California, which was Chenard, Frost, Pratt, Robbins, they were gone. But they would occasionally show up on the weekend and do stuff. And we had, this dirtbag thing pisses me off because people don't get it. Of all of us, we did not own a tent. Bridwell had a pressure cooker with which we made our staple, which was either popcorn or brown rice. He had a big gray tarp. We would take all our sleeping bags and line them up when a snowstorm came, and we'd sleep under this tarp. So if you imagine a tarp with all of us underneath it, then in the morning you'd see how much snow was on the tarp, and then you'd get your clothes and shimmy out and run to the bathroom and then run to the cafeteria to see if you could scarf some food from somebody. That hasn't really changed, I don't think. But anyway, nobody had a big enough rack to do a big wall. So you had to put pitons and carabiners on the communal rack. So under the picnic table was this rack that was the everybody rack. And then you negotiate as who got to take it to go on a climb. And everybody had their own smaller rack for cragging and doing stuff. So it was pretty cool. And we were doing first free ascents that you didn't really know because there was nobody keeping track. But we were going up on the big walls that Robbins, Pratt, Chenard et al. Had done in 5 days and 6 days, and we were doing them in 2 or 3 days. So I think we were the best climbers in the country, but we didn't know it because we were all 18 years old or 19 years old or 20 or something.
It's sort of in between eras in a way. It's kind of in between the golden age of Yosemite, the first ascents of all the walls, and then the sort of stone masters that came later.
We were the transition.
Yeah, totally.
Bridwell and I failed going to Sickle Ledge. It took us all day to get to Sickle, and the ropes were, I remember this giant tangle of rope that like 3 ropes all just in a knot, and I was trying to untangle it. And I think there were 4 of us, and we got to Sickle. It took all day, and we looked at each other as like, okay, we are not ready.
That's the classic nose climbing experience right there. I feel like half the parties that attempt the nose make it to Sickle, which is 4 pitches off the ground, and then look up at the rest of the wall and think, there is no way, and then decide to go down and camp back on the valley floor again.
Exactly. Bridwell and I tried to climb the dihedra wall, and I had led the 6th pitch, and he was climbing up, and he didn't have his hammer sling on, and he tried to take a piton. He took a piton out, and then he couldn't find his holster, and so he just let go of the hammer, thinking the hammer would hang from the sling, and the hammer fell to the ground. And I didn't say anything. I'm sitting up there in a belay seat, and he climbs up the next piton, Jumar's up the next piton, and he starts looking for his hammer, and he looks and looks and looks and looks and looks, and finally stops, and he looks up at me, and I just kind of grin at him and go, yeah, it's on the ground. We're going down. So we were kids. We were making it up.
Did you eventually succeed on the nose?
I did the 13th ascent of the nose with my friend Wayne Goss just before I got drafted and went to Vietnam in 1968. From the ground in 2 bivvies. We had a great time.
Wow, and that was pre-harnesses, pre-nuts.
Hip belay.
So you hip belayed the nose.
Hip belayed the nose.
What do you do? Like all the hanging belays and things? You just hang there and hip belay.
We had belay seats. We called them butt bags. Chenard made them. They were nylon with 2 slings, so you could put them in your pocket. And then you'd clip that into the anchor, and then you'd sit in it. So you had your nylon stirrups, and then you could sit in your butt bag.
I mean, you make that all sound so civilized, but I'm like, that's horrible. And then to hip belay and to like sit, it's like it's so slow and painful and cumbersome.
And the haul bags were Army duffel bags, Army surplus duffel bags. And so you'd have one that had the water in it, the weight, and then the other one would be loose on the outside. We got pretty good at rigging them so they would last like a whole climb.
When you're doing the 13th ascent of the nose, were there any other people on the wall at a time like that? Because there were only, a half dozen routes on El Cap at that point. So there are hardly any other routes, and there are hardly any other climbers capable of climbing any of those routes. So, I mean, does that just mean you're alone on the giant wall?
I've climbed El Cap twice successfully in 3 or 4 attempts, and I've never been on the wall with another person on the wall.
Man, that is an experience that would be hard to have nowadays. I mean, still possible nowadays, but much harder. It's like you're so rarely alone on El Cap nowadays. Did it feel like crazy?
Oh, it just felt we were stoked. We were excited. It was wonderful. We loved it. I still literally can remember penduluming into the stove legs. And I pendulum out there, and I was looking for something to hold on to, a flake or something. And then I realized too late that wasn't going to happen. So I went running back this way, and then I ran back, and I stuck my hand in the crack. And then I looked up at this crack going all the way into the sky. And I was just like as happy as a person could be. I was like, this is the best there ever was.
That right there is probably why you're such a good lifetime climber, because I think to be in a position like that and be like, this is amazing, I live for this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you've been able to climb at a high level for 66 years or whatever you said. It's like, that is incredible.
Yeah. And then, I had to climb up until I was high enough above the Blair that he could swing over. So I couldn't put any gear in for 60 or 80 feet or whatever,
Yeah.
Here I go.
That is amazing. It's funny because that's really similar to the experiences that you have on the nose nowadays in a way. Just, like punching up the cracks. It's like, it's the same cracks. It's the same feeling of awe and grandness looking up and being like, oh, wow, it just goes all the way to space. Like, here we go. Except the difference is the safety margins now are quite a bit better.
Yeah.
The rope will actually hold a fall, and the gear is all rated, and everything's been quality controlled. And
but in climbing, I never really was afraid for the most part. I mean, there've been times that I was afraid, and there've been times that I backed off leads, that I said, I don't want to do this. I want to go down. One thing that I don't think people get is when you do cutting edge climbing, how much you fail, how much you go down. I mean, I always had in my climbing pack, always had 30 or 40 feet of half-inch webbing in the top of it and a knife, because you never knew when you're going to have to build 1,500 feet of anchors to get to the ground.
So you mentioned being drafted and going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Were there many other climbers that were drafted at the time?
Just me, as far as I knew. Ridwell didn't get drafted because he is such a druggie.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, nobody would want him in the armed services. You're like, oh, God.
Wayne Goss got drafted too. I literally was in Camp 4 when I got my you have to report papers. It was hard. It was really hard. 18 months, 19 months. I came back from Vietnam and I went to San Francisco, and Wayne was there, and we drove straight to the valley and went up on a new route on El Cap.
Which route?
Aquarian Wall.
Did you guys do the first ascent?
No, it was Ridwell and Kim's route. I felt really bad about it, actually, because they had only done like the first 6 or 8 pitches. And so we redid that and actually got about to their high point or something. And I was just a total PTSD emotional disaster. And I'm like, we're poaching our friend's route. This is fucked. We shouldn't be doing this. And I just started crying. And I just want to go down. And actually what I didn't realize is that I led the hard 8 pitch on it. They had done it with copperheads and stuff. They'd already invented copperheads in the 2 years that I'd been going. And I led it with the tips of pins, these pin stacks, little tiny, like 4 pins in a little tiny thing with all tied off, very elaborately put together that would hold body weight.
That's the worst.
Anyway, but I was a wreck, and I said, I can't climb. I can't do this. I don't want to be on their route. It took me about a year to get to where I could kind of climb again.
Yeah. Had you spent your time in Vietnam thinking about climbing, or were you just immersed in your experience there?
I wasn't thinking about climbing. I mean, I was missing it. Jim Matson died during that time. There'd been a big rainstorm, and Pratt and Fredericks had been somewhere high on the dihedral and had disappeared from everybody's view. They were actually back in a cave, sort of. And then when the storm stopped, everybody was worried about him. And there was no SAR then or any rescue or anything like that. So Jim and a bunch of guys went up to the top, and he, being the best climber of all of us, was rappelling down. He was on a wet rope, and he had a bunch of other ropes with him. He was a big guy. It was a carabiner brake where you put carabiners and make a rappel device out of it. And he had a knot tied in the end of the rope, and he lost control of the rappel. And he started moving faster than he could control. And when he got to the end of the rope, the knot went right through the brake. The lore has it that he had a radio on him that was clipped on. And as he went off the end of the rope and he rotated out into space, he said, "What the fuck?" And then he said, "Well, here we go." And that's how we lost the best climber I ever climbed with. And I've climbed with a lot of very good climbers.
I mean, you must have so many stories like that, just because, I mean, I know that I personally have experiences like that from, collected from whatever the 29 years that I've been climbing. But the time that I've been climbing is probably safer overall than it was when you started. Kind of like, how have you managed to maintain your love of climbing for so long with all the emotional baggage that you collect over the years like that? Like horrible stories and like terrible experiences here and there. And it's like you have so many incredible experiences, but then it does come with a lot of baggage too.
Well, one thing that helps is nobody ever died when they were with me, which I'm proud of. I went from this rock climbing thing into being an alpine climber. And alpine climbers die. It's just a question of, do they die or do they stop, really? And so somehow it didn't upset me because, it's like some people, as soon as I meet them, I know they're going to die climbing. Muggs Stump, who I climbed with a lot, I knew Muggs was going to die in the mountains.
Muggs Stump was younger than you, huh?
Yeah, 10 years, 15 years younger.
That's so funny because I think of Muggs Stump as being the really, really old, like with all due respect. But it's because I've climbed with Conrad Anker quite a bit, and Conrad was kind of mentored by Muggs Stump to some extent.
Yeah.
And so I've always thought of Muggs Stump as like several generations back in climbing, like really old. And I'm like, oh wow, now I'm talking to somebody who's even older than Muggs Stump.
Well, I was Muggs's mentor, and Muggs mentored Conrad, who mentored Jimmy or whoever,
Yeah. It all gets passed down. That's so, I don't know. I just always thought of him as like one of the elder statesmen of alpinism in the U.S. And it's interesting to hear, you passing that knowledge down to him.
Well, yeah, I think so. He was had been drafted to play football in the NFL. He was Muggs, without his clothes on, is a pretty remarkable thing. He had a girlfriend in every town. They all knew what the deal was, that he could show up and stay for a week or a month or a day. But he was moving on, and that was, they got. But he'd never done a big climb. He was just a kid from Salt Lake, and he wanted to be a famous climber. And so I went on the Hummingbird Ridge of Mount Logan with 4 of us, and it turned out that the other people couldn't lead except Muggs could and I could. So I would lead all one day, and he would lead all one day, and it turned out to be remarkably hard climbing. That route has never had a second ascent, and I don't think ever will be repeated, actually, because big chunks of it have fallen off and stuff. And anyway, we were on that for 10 days, climbing every day, carrying our giant packs and stuff. And at the end of it, he said he wanted to go there because he wanted to be a famous climber, and he wanted to climb the Emperor Face with me, and then he would be a famous climber. I said, okay.
It's like you were climbing the hardest free climbs. You climbed some big walls. At what point did you feel interested in moving into the bigger mountains?
Well, I think for almost all of us in the mid 60s, the whole idea that we had is what we were doing was to get into the big mountains. That this idea that El Cap was huge and cool and great, but they were bigger cliffs in the world. And we should go climb those bigger cliffs. And some of them came with snow and ice and stuff like that. So I think I always held that idea. And the other thing that happened from 71 to 75, 78, is we invented waterfall climbing. The 10 of us or 12 of us in the country that were doing it.
So you're saying that all of your climbing was always sort of with the intention to climb bigger faces and bigger walls around the world. And so as you learned how to ice climb, as you started climbing waterfalls, you sort of gained the technical ability to climb some of those big, snowy, icy faces. You're maybe most well known for the Emperor face on Mount Robson.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a scary looking wall. It's so crazy. And maybe for context, I'll just add that for anybody listening, they would probably only know this from the footage in the film The Alpinist of Marc-Andre Leclerc soloing that face. And it's like the incredible aerial footage with him soloing at the top of this insane mountain. I saw Mount Robson for the first time in person last year, and I was like, oh my God, like that's a really scary looking mountain. It's super intimidating. It's like big and just sticks out and it's very intimidating. So anyway, so what was your experience climbing the Emperor Face?
So I'd started climbing more in the mountains, and I'd gone to Europe that summer, and we'd climbed the north face of the Eiger, the second American ascent of it. And then that fall, I went with a group, and I'd never been in the Rockies, and they said, well, we're going to go up to the backside of Robson. I'm like, okay. And I sort of knew there was a big face back there, but I didn't really know much about it. So we hiked up to the lake and turned the corner, and there that was. And I'm like, okay, well, I climbed the Eiger, and it's only 5,000 feet tall, and it was climbed in 1938. I'm now looking at a face that's 8,000 feet tall, that only one party has ever been on and got off barely with their life. And I want to climb this, basically.
I really thought you were going to go the other way, where you say all that and then you're like, nah, we probably shouldn't do that.
No, I was like, no, I'm going to do this. And we didn't get on it that time. But I was kind of determined to do it. And I thought, well, I had built the skill set. I had my big wall stuff because we knew there was a big rock thing at the top of it that was 1,000 or 2,000 feet tall. And we didn't know what that was going to be. The other people who'd been in it climbed up to that and gone, oh, we can't climb this, and gone home. And you know, when you're looking up at 8,000 feet of rock, it's really foreshortened and you can't really tell.
Is it really an 8,000 foot face?
Yeah.
Dude, I didn't realize it was that big.
It is. If you really start at the way bottom, of it.
That is so big. I mean, the mountain is so prominent and so ominous.
It's a pretty neat mountain. It's like a full Alpine Alps or Himalayas scale mountain.
It's like a little piece of the Himalaya, like sitting tucked into like a national park in the Rockies. You're like, oh, it all feels pretty tame around there. And then you're suddenly like, oh God. It's like, I mean, the Rockies are cool. And then you're like, oh my God, what is that? It's like a totally different level. I didn't realize that it was a long-term project for you like that. So how many different trips did you make back to Mount Robson before you eventually climbed the Emperor Face?
I think we climbed on my 5th try, but 2 of the tries one of them didn't even get to the mountain.
That's fair for all alpinism, isn't it? You're like, oh, we went, we looked, conditions were bad, it was snowing, and we went home.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it took a bunch of tries, but I was starting to get a handle on it. I'd been up on it a little bit, and I kind of had a sense of what it was going to be, I think.
So what were you trying to achieve on the Emperor Face?
I was trying to do the first ascent of the biggest cliff in North America, right? So as someone said in a book somewhere, it was Muggs's first big climb and my last.
We'll be back with more after the break. When you start climbing, you typically make progress every time you go to the gym. You get stronger, your technique improves, you get better shoes, and you quickly jump another grade or 2. You're a solid climber now. But then eventually that progress starts to slow down. And somewhere over the last months or years, you stopped making progress. The good news is you don't have to stay stuck. With the right approach, you can jump several grades again, just like you did when you first started climbing. And you can continue to improve your technique and begin to look truly elegant on the wall. There's nobody better to help you on that journey than Dave McLeod. Dave has been a pro climber for over 20 years and is widely regarded as one of the best climbing coaches. Dave has partnered with Altitude, Magnus Bitmo's climbing platform, to produce the most comprehensive climbing technique training that will allow you to break through the intermediate plateau and unlock harder grades. To learn the 3 key elements needed to make progress again, and to sign up for the course, head to altitudeclimbing.com/climbinggold. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix formulated with a science-backed ratio of sodium to potassium to magnesium. Each packet delivers a meaningful dose of electrolytes free of sugar, artificial colors, or other dodgy ingredients. It tastes great, and I've used it extensively on expeditions. And my 2-year-old loves it and calls it sprinkle water. Element is formulated for anyone looking to restore health through hydration, and is perfectly suited for athletes, folks who are fasting, or those who follow keto, low-carb, whole food, or paleo diets. Try Element totally risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll refund your order, no questions asked. Get your free sample pack with any Element purchase at drinkelement.com/climbinggold. Be sure to try the new Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water. That's drinklmnt.com/climbinggold. You've written about feeling moments of transcendence on some of your biggest climbs. Was that something that only happened in the most intense situations like the Emperor Face, or is that something that you experienced through climbing more broadly?
Well, I remember lots of times on the Diamond where you get into this headspace to where there is no ground, there is no rope, there is no, whether you have the rope or not, there's just climbing. You really lose awareness of everything except the bubble that you're in. You're in the bubble, and you know you need to do the moves well. And when I even say that, I just come into a better body position.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you just sat up straight. Your posture is looking great. You're like, yeah, you were ready to send. You just stepped into your bubble.
Yeah, here we go. And then you just climb, and it's really, really fun headspace to be in, I think. Mm-hmm. I was able to go there sometimes just for fun, like on the Diamond. You can put gear in, it's all good. But I was always in my life able to do it when I really needed to. My climbing partners have said they could see me just shift, like I'd be climbing really terribly. Sometimes we do. And then all of a sudden it would become real. Like all of a sudden I'm kind of run out and you can't like just lollygag around and screw up. And they said they can just see everything shifts. And I just come into the moment like, oh, I need to actually rock climb now. So I know there's definitely been times I've been afraid, but being afraid was more about before you reach, there's these points on climbs that you can't go back from. I mean, in single pitch rock climbing, it could be that you've climbed so certain distance above your last piece of gear. And it's like, I don't think I can go down and get back to that. Or could I climb down enough that I could just jump? Because I might be good enough. Or do I just go up? So in those kind of situations, I don't get scared. I get incredibly rational, incredibly focused.
That is kind of the best experience in climbing. I mean, I feel the same way that really that's what you're aspiring for in climbing, to have those moments where you're like, now I'm really doing it and I'm doing it well.
Exactly. And the Emperor in particular, it was getting into the bubble and almost staying there for hours and hours at a time. It's like a meditation. I think I'm alive because there were places, more than one time in climbing that it was falling apart for some reason, and I was able to go there and be there and all of a sudden be really good for a hot second. But to stay, that pitch on the Emperor Face, I had 30 feet of very, very hard mixed climbing that I had to do. Last hard pitch of the face. It was the pitch to get off the rock. It overhung about 15 feet, 150 feet. In the end, I had in a 1-inch angle about halfway up the pitch because I'd back cleaned the pitch to get the gear because we only had 12 pitons and I needed them. So I'd lowered off and back leaned. And so I had a 1-inch angle, and then I had a knife blade about 20 feet above that, a single knife blade. And then I climbed probably 30 feet above that knife blade of what Steve House repeated that and called it M8. Probably the hardest mixed pitch in the world at that moment, 1978. So with straight shafted bamboo tools.
Well, now you're in your 70s. It seems like you still have a tremendous enthusiasm for rock climbing. Have you climbed 513 recently, or are you projecting 513? Because I feel like some of my friends in Boulder maybe were talking about you climbing 513, but you're in your 70s, you've been climbing 66 years. And, it's like, are you climbing near 513-ish?
I haven't actually sent the 513 since I was like 68 or something.
Okay.
So when I started transitioning from presenting as male to more female, everything kind of fell apart for a while, and I didn't really have anybody to climb with, I didn't feel like, and stuff. So now recently, I have been projecting this pretty hard 13A. And 2 days ago, I went through the whole crux like perfectly and into the first rest, and I think I didn't stay there long enough. And then I went to the other rest, and then there's a little 12A finish. And I got into the 12A finish, and I brought my hands up to the last two holds, and all I have to do is one more move out, and I didn't have the juice to get my feet up and go. So that's pretty close.
Yeah, so you basically climbed 513 2 days ago at 76 years old.
77.
Oh, 77. Yeah. Even better. That's so crazy. I mean, that's incredible.
But for me, it's still that same thing of to climb this 26 moves of hard rock climbing through the cruxes. And one of the clips is really hard to do. And just to do it all and do it right just really makes me feel good. It makes me really happy. I like it that I can get my body to do it still.
You just kind of casually glossed over the transition in your late 60s, early 70s and partners and dealing. I mean, was it hard to get back into climbing? Let's just dive in. It's like, talk about transitioning.
Well, I mean, I'd always wanted this my whole life, but it'd always been a giant secret. I never told anybody. And I was really terrified of anybody ever finding out and all this stuff because I didn't know what was going to happen. But as the world changes and moves on, it sort of became accessible. The thing that was so scary about starting it, it was, I mean, it's really scary to think about the emperor face when you're standing at the bottom of it and to climb up 1,000 feet and climb back down. And that's scary. But then you're over that. But what I was so afraid of is, was I going to destroy or wreck the rest of my life, right? I thought, if my partner divorces me and I can't stay in Boulder and I don't know what I'm going to do, if I just went to San Francisco and got some good surgery so I looked more feminine and started as a new person, what would that be like? And what would it be like to walk into the climbing gym and as a new person and see if I could find somebody to climb with me without a history, right? Without, I mean, I have a pretty deep sense of the history of American rock climbing because I was in the middle of it for an awful lot of it. So, I mean, I really thought about what if I have to start over, if I can't do architecture because nobody will hire me, if I'm alone because my partner can't do this with me. That was really scary. That was terrifying, all of that. And so, but in the beginning of it, I was kind of a wreck, didn't really understand who to climb with as much as anything. And so I wasn't as good a climber for 3 or 4 years, I think. But gradually, actually, I climb mostly with women that climb 513 and 514, it seems like. And I can't keep up with them, but I can belay pretty good. And so I sort of got emotionally over that. And so for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been able to fully enjoy climbing. And I love to climb in the gym. I like sport climbing. I don't want to do anything dangerous. I don't want to fall any further than 20 feet or something,
What was the bigger challenge with transitioning though? Was it partners, like the community, or is it challenging, or is it just liberating to suddenly be the person that you felt your whole life?
It became liberating. But once I started, it was terrifying because I had to totally tell my partner what I wanted to do. And we were going to all this therapy and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I just had to deal with this thing that had been in me all these years of wanting to always wear women's clothes and stuff like that and sneaking around and feeling bad about myself, basically. So it started with coming out to my partner and going to a lot of therapy. And then I came out to my kids, who were all great. And so I started coming out to my close friends in climbing. And then I had been climbing with Madeline Sorkin. And I thought, okay, well, Madeline's a gay person. I like Madeline. I'm going to tell Madeline. So I went, called her and said, I want to meet and have coffee and talk to you about something. So we had a meeting. We went to the coffee shop, and she's been climbing with Jesse Huey. She rocks in with Jesse. And so it's like, I was thinking Jesse's like the most macho person, and I didn't want to just work this out to Jesse. But then they sat down, and Madeline said, oh, you wanted to talk to me, not me and Jesse. And I said, yeah. And then somehow I just blurted out. I said, I've always wanted to be a girl and not a boy. And Jesse's eyes got really big, and he said, who do you want to have sex with? I said, my wife. And then the next day I came into the climbing gym, and a movement, the big round steps there in Boulder. And so I come in, I'm sitting on the steps, and all these women come up and hug me. And I'm like, what's going on? And then Dana Richardson comes over, Dana Ledzinski comes over and says, you told Jesse, and Jesse told Olivia, and Olivia told everybody. It's like, okay, I guess this is not a secret anymore. Then I thought, who do I need to actually tell right now? And I thought, well, my main employers in the climbing gym business are Mike and Ann Worley. I'm going to go talk to them. And so I went and found Ann Worley and said, I'm transitioning to living more as a woman. And I just wanted to tell you before, because it's in the gossip world now. She said, well, what does this mean for our business relationship? And I said, well, I hope nothing. And she said, okay, good. That was the end of that. So that's been generally the way it was. The community's been fine with it. It just took me really years to try to get it out into the community and to find out what was going to happen. And I'm a happier person. I take estrogen, and I think it might be making me a stronger, better rock climber at the age of 77. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm happy with my life now in a way that's better than it's ever been.
Isn't it with the relatively easy response from the community and all your friends, roughly supporting? I mean, I know there must have been some turmoil with some of your other older partners and things, but does it make you wish that you had transitioned sooner?
I'm not a really looking back person, and in 1965, when I already knew I felt this way, this was not a thing people did, but almost no people did, and.
Yeah, growing up in Texas in 1965, you were like, hell no.
Yeah. I mean, I'd go into the barber shop and I'd say, can you leave it a little bit long? And they'd go, do you want a crew cut or a burr? Those were the two choices. $2 and you're done. Right. No, it wasn't a thing. So I can't go back. You can't redo it. I climbed a lot of stuff. I raised my kids. I was a carpenter, and then I became an architect, and I designed a lot of buildings for a lot of people. And yeah, I don't have any real regrets.
I know you built some great gyms. Now, though, with your transition, do you feel like you're done in a way? You're just like, well, that's the thing I did. Easy. I'm just living my best life. Is it an ongoing source of emotional turmoil in any way, or is that just something that once you sort of work through it, then you're like, cool, now I just get to live my best life?
Not really. You still have an imposter syndrome, kind of a little bit of like, can I really put on this pretty dress and go to the grocery store? And the answer is basically yeah, but you still. It's like, oh, what am I going to wear to this, or all that kind of stuff.
Is that something that you think just gets easier with time because you just get used to, you just consistently do something and you're like, it's always, this is the way I do it, and that's normal?
Yeah, and also I got enough self-confidence so that if I am wearing a dress and somebody hears my voice, which is what they key on, sometimes they go, "Can I help you, sir?" It's just like, yeah, I need a pound of hamburger or whatever. It's like, I don't think it's an intentional meanness. I think people gender people really quickly and kind of stick with their initial gendering.
How has that been for you in the climbing world? Because, it's like your name was so widely known in the community for so many years. You're in guidebooks. Basically, your climbing achievements have been celebrated for 50 or 60 years. I don't even totally know how that works,
It worked fine. Nobody really cares. Sort of gradually, when people do guidebooks or mountain project and stuff, they go through it. If it was Jim, they change it to Jamie.
Nice. So basically just slowly updates as like when people republish books and republish whatever.
I think there's probably a lot of people now that know me as Jamie that don't know that I was, the younger generation, the kids that are 12, 15, 20, 25, they just don't give a shit about this stuff. They just see like, you can be whatever gender thing you want, and we don't really care, and you can change and you can try stuff on and try to get off. And
because you have such a long perspective on climbing, because you've seen it for so long now at this point, and you've worked in the industry since you've been building climbing gyms, did the growth of climbing seem inevitable to you over the years, or has that actually seemed like a recent phenomenon?
It really didn't surprise me because I always thought that climbing is innate in us. I thought we still have got some of this monkey stuff in our brains. And have any of your kids climbed onto the kitchen counter to get a cookie?
Just this morning, my daughter did a few things that I was like, oh, geez, like kind of
They're
extreme,
really good
actually.
climbers.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive, actually.
They can bring their foot up onto the counter and rock that big old diaper over. I don't know. I think it's in us. I think it's innate. So in that sense, it doesn't surprise me. And I think it's very healthy. It's a mind-body thing. It's bilateral. It's really excellent form of exercise. It's great.
Through those nearly 70 years, did you have moments where you sort of fell out of love with climbing? I mean, because you've raised a family, you've had relationships, you've gone to war. I mean, you've had so much other life happen, like a rich, full life, a career as an architect. Did you ever have moments where climbing didn't mean as much to you?
Yeah. So after the Emperor Face, when it still took me a couple years to really truly stop going on scary bad things in the mountains, but I had a long period in the middle of my life where I went to college, which I hadn't done, and finished it and became an architect and raised my 4 kids and didn't climb very much at all. I think an important thing actually is that how do you get to be a person who can climb for 70 years? And I think the thing of it is to not overdo it all the time. That if you always run up the mountain and if you do more and more and more for your whole life, your body runs out of cartilage. You run out of body, you run out of knees. And
I was like, now you tell me after 30 years of going as hard as I can go all the time. Like,
I don't think you're going as hard as you can go all the time. Are you?
well, no, it's honestly, actually, I'm learning the lesson that you're describing right now, because now with 2 small kids, and I definitely have like rain thing. Like today I'm resting and I'm resting tomorrow. I'm taking 2 rest days just
2
because
whole
of
days.
life and work stuff, and just, that's the way it goes sometimes, just with childcare and whatever. And you're kind of like, all right, this is, So no, I actually do think I'm mellowing a little bit with that stuff.
Yeah, I think in the end you only get so many knee motions, and if you use your raising your children time assiduously to take care of yourself and not do quite so much, then you can come out of it with a body that'll go longer. Is my idea.
That's going to be my one takeaway from this interview. Is I learned a really important thing from Jamie Logan today, and that's that I got to just embrace the young child years as a sort of regenerating my body so I can go hard into my 70s.
Yeah, because you really want to come into your 50s and 60s and 70s in good shape and climbing well. And almost all the people of my generation that I climbed with have had a lot of problems in their later life with their body, with knees and shoulders and elbows, and they can't lift their arm up.
You've said that climbing was a refuge to you throughout your life.
Yeah.
Now that you've been part of the climbing community for basically your entire life, is that refuge just your home?
Well, it's just, I like my role in the climbing community. We used to have a Sunday morning bouldering operation going at Rockin' and Jammin', the first real climbing gym here in Colorado. And it was Daniel Woods and Emily Harrington and Paige Clausen and me and Jim Collins. That was our Sunday morning, and they were 12.
I remember Rockin' and Jammin'. I went there for nationals when I was like a kid, when I was like 14 or 12 or something.
Yeah, and I've sat there on the bench and given good advice to an awful lot of the young, really good climbers. And I feel like sometimes I have this weird role of being like the odd trans grandmother of American rock climbing, because they know they can ask me stuff and I'm not judgmental and I have a longer view.
So what do you see as your legacy in climbing?
I don't know. I mean, I guess the thing that's known is the Emperor Face still. I mean, that thing has only been climbed 8 times since we did it 50 years ago. Total 8 times.
That's crazy.
And nobody's ever truly repeated our route. And it's only one other time that somebody started at the bottom and climbed all the way to the top. And they got, like 2 years ago, and they got the PLA d'Or for it. So.
Did that make you slightly better? Because the PLA d'Or didn't even exist when you did it.
No, there were no prizes, no sponsors, no money.
You need your retroactive PLA d'Or. You're like, come on, guys.
Well, I'm sort of getting that now, because it's really interesting to me to have. When we climbed the first free ascent of the Diamond, we didn't come home and tell anybody. And Roger Briggs called me 2 weeks later and said he was going up to do the first free ascent. And did we already do it? I'm like, yeah, we did. Some people promote themselves, and I never promoted myself. And also there was not really any way in that time to promote yourself. So I just climbed because I loved climbing. And I did want to do the first free ascent of the Diamond, and I did want to do the first ascent of the Emperor Face. And those are ego and remembering something you did that's pretty great. But in the end, doesn't why I did it. I did it because I loved doing it. And I still love doing it.
I know, that's why you've been doing it so well for 66 years. Kind of like, there's just, you have to really love something if you can keep at it for so long.
Yeah. I mean, if I go into the climbing gym and I on site at 12C and climb it perfectly, I'm like, that was great. But the other thing is that Arc'teryx made a movie about my transitioning. And that's in film festivals and on YouTube right now. And so this fall, I'm spending a lot of time going to film festivals and talking about it. And it seems really important because the act of being a transgender person is at this point a very political act in the United States. So I'm sort of being the older ambassador for transgender stuff in a way. And I think because of my climbing history and because of how old I am, I think it makes it harder for people to beat up on me. I seem to be able to get away with telling my story, and which is not to say people don't say mean things in the comments. And sometimes it makes me feel bad. But I'm tough enough to do it. I can take it. I can try to be a positive model of being a transgender person in a bigger community, in my town, in the country, in the climbing community. I give the kids permission to be whoever they want to be, in a way. And a lot of them have said that they really appreciate that. That there aren't a lot of role models for them. There aren't a lot of older people that are overtly LGBTQ. And so here I am. I'm me, and this is my story, and I hope it helps.
Thanks, Jamie, for sitting down and talking with us. Jamie's film is out now. The link is in the show notes. Check it out. Climbing Gold is a production of Duct Tape Then Beer. Alex Honnold is our host. Our production and editing team includes the talents of Marco Seiler Gonzalez and Evan Phillips. Skylar Perwins is our YouTube and social media editor, and he edited today's show. Music today by Brendan O'Connell, Jesse Sibbenberg, Garland, Pastel, and the Volunteer State. The tracks are courtesy of the Artists or Track Club. Our creative director is me, Fitz Cahal. Our executive producers are Jonathan Retzik and Ben Endy for RXR Sports, and Lacey Hendricks and Becca Cahal for Duct Tape Then Beer. Thanks for listening.